A vote for you is a vote for Donald Trump.
Israel is a proxy for the US here.
Can I ask you about that Mehdi Hassan interview?
While he opposes genocide, he's all in favor of those committing genocide. He's a lapdog to empire.
Does the Green Party have a Syria problem?
I have never expressed support for Assad. The American people want to end the genocide. Our children are not okay unless all children are okay. There is a new moral compass here, and much of that is coming from the Muslim community.
The pro-genocide administration of Biden and Harris has been involved in a frenetic outreach to America's small but vocal Muslim community. These critical constituents in crucial battleground states like Michigan are where November's election will be won or lost. Both parties, the Democrats and Republicans, are Zionists to the core. But this genocide has happened with the seal of approval and the consent of the Biden-Harris administration. Is Gaza a turning point? Can we move beyond this two-party nightmare? Are third-party options plausible in a system that approves only two possibilities? Or is voting for anyone but the two bad options a wasted vote? And what are the broader questions of US empire and its propensity to violence? How will this election address what the world observes as an imperium without moral or ethical standards? Now, today I have a very special guest, Dr. Jill Stein, leader of the Green Party and presidential candidate. Jill is a Harvard-educated doctor, an environmentalist, campaigner, and organizer, and she joins us today from San Francisco. Dr. Jill Stein, it's a pleasure to have you with us, and thank you for joining us on the Think It Muslim.
It's such an honor to be here. Thank you so much for this conversation.
Well, it's wonderful. I think we've got a lot of ground to cover today. So, Jill, let's start with what I've really observed amongst the Muslim communities in the United States and beyond, actually, and conscientious voters. There is this anger, a palpable anger over Gaza. And many are pledging their vote to you, a third party, the Green Party. Now, you know that many of your detractors argue that a vote for you is a vote for Donald Trump. How would you respond to that?
I think that represents an incredible presumptuousness by the Democratic Party and the Harris campaign that they own your vote, that they somehow own the Muslim vote, and that you owe your allegiance to the Democratic Party. And what for? The party that could not even give Palestinian voices 2 minutes on the stage at the Democratic National Nominating Convention, where the delegates held their ears so as not to hear the names of the murdered on outside of that convention. It's incredibly presumptuous of the Democratic Party to imply that they own your votes. They have to earn your votes. They clearly have not earned them. And the notion that a vote for me is a vote for Trump, well, actually, current polls suggest just the opposite of that. In fact, the Muslim American and Arab American community and many other people of conscience have already left the station. They are not going to vote for this administration that is actively committing genocide. So, in fact, those votes are already gone. And now the question is, are these voters going to Donald Trump or are they going to our campaign? So, current polls, one cited by Newsweek this week, the other cited by Breaking Points, the podcast, very popular podcast. They both show, these two polls show, in fact, that we appear to be taking votes from Donald Trump, not from Kamala Harris. And one of the commentators, Crystal Ball, actually observed, well, maybe it's awfully presumptuous of us to pretend that politics is so simple that it's one or the other. And maybe we need a little more humility, and maybe we should back off and not try to manipulate elections. And this has been really our point of view from the Green Party all along as an independent third party, that voters have a right to vote for a candidate that represents their views, their needs, their aspirations. We have a right to that vote. And if some are concerned that votes might be taken from another candidate, which, by the way, is what democracy is about. We're supposed to compete for votes. candidates are supposed to compete for your vote. So the whole notion is really a ridiculous framing to start with. But even if you subscribe to that, then the answer is not to suppress alternative voices. It's not to suppress the voices against genocide, the voices against endless war, the voices against climate catastrophe, whatever. These are the voices Americans want. Over 60% of Americans regularly say in polls that they want other voices and other choices in the presidential race. So the simple solution here is to simply enact a voter reform called ranked choice voting, which prevents any so-called splitting of the vote, any possibility that you could be casting a wasted vote that would be essentially futile. In ranked choice voting, you rank your choices. If your first choice loses, your vote is basically reassigned to your second choice. So it prevents any possibility of a so-called split vote or a spoiled election. This is the actual solution. If you think that's a problem, here's how to solve it. And it speaks volumes that the Democrats refuse to support this system. In fact, they work very hard to block it. Why? Because they rely on fear and extortion. They want to extort your vote rather than win your vote. Why do they not want to win your vote? And right now, Kamala Harris could go a long way to win back Muslim votes if she simply took a stand right now and enacted a weapons embargo to the state of Israel, which is what the people of America want and what Muslim Americans want as well. She could win your vote. She has the power to do that. But she would rather lose the election than end the genocide and the massacre of children that's going on. So, this is a refusal of the candidate to basically win your vote because they have donors, whether it's AIPAC or the weapons profiteers. They have donors who rank number one. That's who the Democratic Party and the Republican Party and these two candidates prioritize. They prioritize their donors, not their voters. That's why they have to eliminate the competition and silence the competition, because these candidates who serve the war industry, who are dedicated to genocide, this is why they cannot actually stand up and fight for your vote, because to do so would be to betray their big money donors.
Are you giving too much agency to the vice president here, Kamala Harris? I mean, I was speaking to a Black Muslim organizer a couple of days ago, and he said to me that Kamala Harris is different to Joe Biden, but because she's vice president, she's not able to voice her disagreement with the genocide. And once she is elected, she will reverse position. How likely do you think that is?
I'd say famous last words, listen to what I say, not to what I do. She could respectfully voice her disagreement. It's true she cannot overrule the president, but she has a lot of agency as the candidate for president. There ought to be a great deal of respect for not only for her opinions, but also for her status in the polls. But unfortunately, she cannot find a single difference between herself and Joe Biden when actually asked. The difference she points to is that, well, she'll maybe have a Republican in her cabinet. So it's hard to give much agency to her at all because she will not assert herself, and she tends to, drift with the wind and seek whatever seems to be popular and convenient at the moment. So, this is the danger of such a candidate who's been raising money hand over fist and who has more billionaire donors than ever on record. So, what are the odds that she's going to stand up against the interests of Wall Street and the war machine and the military industrial complex and APAC? What are the odds that she's going to take a principled stand in the future when she has yet to find a principled stand really across the board in the past?
Dr. Stein, can I ask you about that Mehdi Hassan interview probably a couple of months back or a month and a half back? Now, of course, I think that Mehdi probably has a very strong inclination towards the Democrats, and we've seen that over the last few weeks. But he did raise some uncomfortable questions about Syria. I suppose my question is, does the Green Party have a Syria problem? Has it in the past dabbled with pro-Assadist views?
I don't believe so, not that I'm aware. The Green Party is vigilant about U.S. interference and U.S. You know, manipulation and support for uh, so-called what do they call them? The more moderate, terrorists and funding ISIS. So the Green Party is very wary of interfering in other governments, but I don't believe I have heard the party adopt positions in support of Assad. And our campaign has been accused of taking a stand for Assad back in 2015. I mean, you have to go back to 2015, where a statement was posted on our website without approval because the issue was controversial within our campaign. We were not going to take a pro-Assad stance, but a statement got posted that contained one sentence of support for Assad. And when we became aware of that, it was taken down within approximately a month or so. And I have never expressed support for Assad. And, uh, the truth of the matter is we support human rights. We support the sovereignty of the Syrian people. Actually, when I was at that notorious media conference in Moscow,
Mm.
and I had an opportunity to speak on it, I actually took Putin to task for his bombing campaign in Syria, out of sympathy to the Syrian people and their right to sovereignty and self-determination and to be free from human rights abuses. And bombing campaigns are horrific forms of intervention, and untold thousands of people were killed in that bombing campaign. And in fact, the words that I used, to my recollection, was that this was following in the footsteps of misguided U.S. foreign policy, where we had, basically assaulted Iraq and Afghanistan and had made a complete mess out of these countries through violent intervention. Violent intervention is not a pathway to peace or to human rights and sovereignty. So we have never, and I have never expressed support for Assad, though we do indeed caution against U.S. intervention, which so often only makes things worse.
So, if I may press you a little bit more on that, I mean, the impression that often we get when we observe some on the left is that uh, if there are autocrats or dictators or strongmen who are anti-American, automatically they must be in the right. And of course, many of these strongmen do oppress and suppress Muslim minorities. I mean, the Chinese and the Uyghurs, for example, or as we said, Assad but of course also President Putin and the Chechens. Can you categorically state that you are not on the side of these people, these leaders, these strongmen who, by and large, do repress the minorities, and many of them are Muslim minorities?
Yes, of course. I think, any leadership has to be taken to task for its human rights violations. I think at the same time, we're quick to acknowledge that our government is, as Martin Luther King put it, the greatest purveyor of violence in the world today, and we are certainly guilty of slaughtering millions of people from Vietnam to Iraq and Afghanistan. So, I think our criticisms have to be taken with a grain of salt because we have our own government to account for and hold accountable. But within that framework, recognizing, as Martin Luther King said, my country is the greatest purveyor of violence in the world today. Within that framework, yes, there are so many other leaders who are abusing human rights and need to be called out for that.
How do you understand the position of Mehdi Hassan? Of course, he's not here to answer for himself, but Mehdi has very strongly argued against the genocide. But at the same time, I know you've had conversations with him on Twitter and elsewhere. Mehdi has come out in favor of Kamala Harris. Like, how would you frame his position on Kamala Harris?
While he opposes genocide, he's all in favor of those committing genocide. And to me, that is just a um, That's just a non sequitur. That just doesn't follow that you oppose the genocide, but you are all out in support of the candidates committing genocide. And Donald Trump has also expressed full support for that genocide. Wants Israel to hurry up and finish the job. But Mehdi Hassan, so they're both, to my mind, they're both greater evils, and one cannot parse that. Kamala Harris is better. She's actually doing it. How do you get worse than what we are seeing playing out on our cell phones and our computers every day, where children are being purposefully shot in the head? This is a tactic and a campaign where all possibilities for dialogue and diplomacy are eliminated when Israel is in the business of assassinating the spokespeople and the negotiators. I think they negotiated, they assassinated most recently the Hamas, the Hezbollah leader, after he had agreed to a ceasefire. Then they assassinated him. This is just the height of treachery, barbarism, murderousness, where wounded in the hospital on an IV are actually set aflame and are burned alive. Where patients in hospitals are held hostage, denied food, water, medicine, and their hospitals are under siege. Not to mention, the whole population of 2.25 million people, not only subject to murder, but to torture on a daily basis. What the people of Gaza are subjected to, and now increasingly into Lebanon as well, is bombardment, assassination, being targeted by snipers, told they have to flee while being targeted, being starved of food and water and medicine at the same time, and shelter and sanitation. It's just almost beyond comprehension what is being done. And it's not only that hundreds of thousands of people have been murdered, it's that the entire population is subject to torture really on a daily basis. It's just unthinkable. And, how one can forgive and overlook the perpetrator, the leading perpetrator here, because Israel is a proxy for the U.S. here. The U.S. Is funding this war, is arming Israel, is providing diplomatic cover, is providing intelligence. So the U.S. does not get a pass here, and the U.S. leadership who are committing these war crimes should not get a pass. And to me, it's just unthinkable that Mehdi Hassan goes to the mat here over and over again to try to give Kamala Harris cover. She needs to be held accountable, and he should be part of a movement here to end the genocide. The votes are there, if people had the courage of their convictions, and that ought to be the responsibility of any journalist to actually keep the American people informed of their options and not systematically smear and fear campaign against candidates who actually would solve this crisis. 68% of Americans want an end to the genocide. Over 60% of Americans want a weapons embargo right now in order to force the hand of Israel, because Israel will not go willingly here, certainly not under Netanyahu, it won't. So Mehdi Hassan is in denial of the political power of this movement, and he seeks to intimidate the movement into being some obedient servant of the Democratic Party and its genocidal intent. To me, it's horrific, and it's completely incompatible with Mehdi Hassan's principled position about the genocide. But he's a complete, he's a lapdog to empire here. The press is supposed to be a watchdog, and he's not only not a watchdog, he is a lapdog to power here in his apology, in his promotion of the genocider, and his effort to silence and intimidate those who would stand up and stop this genocide. So to me, this is a very sad state of affairs. And the dialogue that took place, that was not an interview, that was an ambush in which he systematically sought to shut down our point of view, and in particular my point of view, that he was just very quick to cut me off to try to force to force me into a corner and to manipulate my answers. This is not what credible journalism does. It's a real shame, and it's been a real eye opener for many of his base. He quietly posted that interview. He had promoted certain segments, but the whole interview itself went up without any fanfare whatsoever. But it was certainly discovered by his viewers, many of whom have now signed off from his subscribing to his station, feeling like this was just a betrayal of his responsibilities as a journalist.
I suppose his argument, or at least the argument of his supporters, would be that voting for you will not actually stop the genocide. I mean, I think if I'm not mistaken, the last poll I read, you're polling around 2 to 3%. You're not going to win this election. So explain the dynamics of this. How would voting for you help to put an end to the genocide?
So, two things, as Frederick Douglass said, power concedes nothing without a demand. It never has and it never will. Every vote against genocide is a shot across the bow of the empire to say that we are here, we are not going away, we are political opposition. That opposition is strong and its voice is growing. There's no question that there is majority opposition to the genocide. If it simply votes for the lesser evil, it has been politically disappeared. It has been neutralized. It has been disarmed. And in fact, it has been twisted into supporting genocide, into endorsing and enabling genocide. So every vote of resistance against genocide helps bring closer the time when our elected leadership will cave to the reality that the American people oppose this. We need to oppose it with political force. And let me say, if see, they can keep us at 2 to 3% because they silence us. They have, tried to throw us off the ballot. They hired their army of lawyers to use devious, and I must say, to misuse the law, to try to dig up little technicalities in order to throw us off the ballot. And we have been in court in 7 or 8 states fighting them. We've succeeded in all but one, and one is still being contested. But we have largely succeeded here. They tied up our public funding in order to prevent us from using money that we had earned, public funding, in order to meet our various deadlines for the ballot access. And they managed to keep us off the ballot in a couple of states by doing that. In most of those states, we've been able to be on the ballot as a write-in, so that including the write-ins, we are on the ballot for about 95% of voters. They haven't been able to stop us. But this is another way that they try to silence our opposition and basically bury us so that there is not awareness. In the 2020 election, 1 out of every 3 eligible voters did not vote for president. Those voters tend to be younger, of color, and lower income. So exactly the people who are most being thrown under the bus, who are most served by our agenda, which calls for cutting the military budget at least half. It's $1 trillion that is misspent every year on this endless war machine. We call for cutting that in half so that we can spend our tax dollars on the emergencies right here at home instead of spreading chaos, death, and destruction around the world. Instead, we can spend those dollars on our crises right here, fixing the crisis of healthcare, the housing emergency, the education crisis, and the fact that some 43 million Americans are stuck into unpayable student debt. We should have higher education for free. We used to do that in my day growing up. We can certainly do that now. There are solutions. We can fix the climate crisis, but we can't do that while we're spending all this money on the military. The American people are distraught. Polls among young people now in this country show that about 50% of young people say that they are hopeless about the future. 25% of young people have considered harming themselves within 2 weeks of the last poll. This tells us, you couldn't have a stronger indicator out there that this is not working for the American people. 50% of all Americans are struggling not to be evicted. They're within 1 to 2 paychecks of losing their housing, and rates of eviction and homelessness are skyrocketing. This country is in very bad shape. It's being managed on behalf of AIPAC, the war profiteers, Wall Street, the fossil fuel industry. Big, powerful special interests are profiting hand over fist right now, while poverty rates among children have actually tripled. So this country is being thrown under the bus. There is enormous political will. And because of those 1 out of every 3 voters who would vote for an agenda like ours, which is an agenda for everyday working people, the Democrats are terrified that word is getting out about this. They're not just worried about that 2 or 3% in swing states. They're worried about votes all over that could flip in a big way. And, you know, while I'm not holding my breath for going to win this election, on the other hand, I don't rule out that there could be real unintended or unforeseen developments in this race.
Mm.
Israel has announced, many times over that it's about to attack Iran. In at least one of those statements, they've said that this will happen before the election. If Israel attacks Iran, and we know that the nuclear sites are also in their target hairs, which is, a horrific violation of international law and an extremely dangerous thing. Iran is in a military alliance with Russia, and Russia has also expressed grave concern about Israel's intention to attack Iran and especially to attack the nuclear facilities. Is it not possible that we will be in a war with Iran, escalating towards a potential global conflict that could potentially go nuclear as well? And by the way, the draft is back in this country. The draft is back, and men between the ages of 18 and 25 are already signed up for the draft. They don't know about it, or many don't know about it. Those that I've talked about it are completely unaware that they are in the target hairs of the Selective Service. And all it takes is for the president to declare, we're at war and we need boots on the ground. In fact, he's already pledged boots on the ground. Israel has already been given the baton. The baton has been passed for being commander in chief of this country. The U.S. has said Israel can do what it wants and that the U.S. will be there to support them, including boots on the ground. And in addition to 5,000 servicemen and women with each of the aircraft carrier battle groups, one stationed off of Iran, the other now stationed off the west coast of Gaza. So those are 10,000 Americans right there. There are another 40,000 American servicemen and women who are stationed in the Middle East, who are all very much in the target hairs of this growing, rapidly escalating conflict. Another 100, which were sent in maybe 2 weeks ago with the new missile defense system that's being given to Israel, because Israel is completely defenseless here. Israel cannot defend itself, and it certainly cannot conduct the war, not even the war that it has on Gaza, but just expanding that war even to Lebanon. Israel's not accustomed to a long war. Israel's accustomed to a 6-day war or maybe a 6-week war, and that's about it. So Israel is in extremely precarious circumstances right now. Recent poll I heard about says that 1 out of every 3 Israelis is intent on leaving and in the process of leaving Israel. Their economy is in a shambles. Their tourist industry, of course, has completely gone under. So Israel is in very desperate states. It needs the U.S. The U.S. is entirely shares full responsibility here with Israel, which is basically its proxy. And the American people are in the target hairs of this war. So I just want to make the point that really dramatic things could spin out of control very quickly. And it's exactly in that kind of circumstance where you can see the electorate flip on a dime. And those 1 out of 3 voters who aren't voting are not voting to some extent because they don't know that there is a campaign that is standing up for them. If events were to happen, if the news cycle were to go in a direction that basically lifts up our campaign as the only anti-war, anti-genocide, pro-worker, climate emergency campaign, we could see the vote change. There are 3 pro-genocide candidates on the ballot. RFK is still on the ballot in many states. You could see the pro-genocide, pro-war vote split 3 ways. You could see an informed electorate coming out to support our anti-war, anti-genocide, pro-worker campaign. And in a 4-way split, an election can be won with as little as 26%. That's not an impossible movement of the electorate, even overnight, if the country were suddenly to be in a full-blown war, and if the draft were potentially about to be reactivated, if there was talk of boots on the grounds, if there was a real, devastating conflict. And it's hard to imagine how this conflict will not be devastating.
Mm.
So, I just want to make a point that
Yeah.
elections are unpredictable affairs. And, part of what you do as an independent third party is you wait for the moment, and that's a moment that depends on forces much bigger than you. But you have to be ready as a political force to stand up and fight back. And you have to begin that fight at your soonest opportunity. It's not just an opportunity, it's a responsibility. If we want a world that can survive for our children, considering the risks of nuclear war, not only in the Middle East, but also in Taiwan and China, and also with Russia and Ukraine. The U.S. mindset is to basically blow it up, and to resort to violence uh, as a first resort rather than as a last resort. We're going to war all over the place. According to the Congressional Research Service, the U.S. has sent its military into other countries uninvited 250 times in the last 3 decades. We have conducted 80 regime change operations since the Second World War. So this is a country that, as Martin Luther King says, is a massive purveyor of violence. And our instincts, the instincts of our leadership, who are warmongers and have been warmongers and war criminals, their instincts are precisely um, the opposite of what they should be right now. We're in the nuclear age, and you cannot do that. You need to negotiate first. And you need to exhaust all other options, and you should not be conducting war in order to maintain military and economic domination over the world, which is basically the rationale for U.S. foreign policy, also known as full spectrum dominance. We can
Mm.
come back to that if we need to, but the
Sure.
instincts are all wrong,
Yeah.
and they need to be challenged publicly, and especially now. So where we would come out in this election would be totally different if we were included in the dialogue, if there was a real debate here, if the American people knew that there is a campaign across the country for 90% of voters, a choice in this election. There is such a campaign that actually is advocating for the solutions that the American people are absolutely desperate for right now.
Dr. Stein, I mean, that's very, very convincing. Uh, to build a third party, if that's going to have longevity, you obviously need to build a base. And I've come across a good number of Muslims who almost describe the vote they're going to give to you. And it seems to me that a large majority, a plurality of Muslims will give the Green Party the vote, but they describe it as they're lending the vote to the Green Party. In a sense, you haven't quite convinced them that their long-term home is within the Green Party. Now, I have come across, for example, the mayor of Hamtramck. I mean, he's made a very naive decision, I think, to support Donald Trump. But one of his reasons for supporting Donald Trump was to cite social concerns. And I suppose my question here is that how can you reassure voters that your position, your version of pluralism, incorporates a respect for religious attitudes?
Yes. And let me say, I don't think anyone should be manipulated into making premature commitments to any candidate or political party. Um, I think it's much clearer about what's going on in this race. And in that sense, I think it is absolutely, it is kind of a no-brainer strategy. I think that those who oppose genocide need to be supporting our campaign in order to, build political momentum and give voice to a real political movement here that has legs and longevity. And that is a movement against genocide and endless war, because they're kind of inseparable. So that much, I think, is
Right.
that's a partnership right now that makes every sense, imaginable for us to partner in this election. And I think this is a very important get to know you moment. And there are some who've been with us. There are some Muslims and Arab Americans who have sought us out from the very beginning, have become major um, advisors and operators really within the campaign have begun political parties themselves. There is a new chapter of the Green Party in Dearborn, Michigan, for example. And really all over the country now, we are seeing Muslim Americans and Arab Americans who have really joined the fabric of the Green Party. And it is a wonderful thing to behold because we bring different skills to the table, and it's a very powerful and empowering partnership.
Mm.
And I think the future looks very bright for this partnership. I think there's a very deep um, convergence of values and views here. And while there are many in the Green Party who regard themselves as atheists, there are, I would say, even more who regard themselves as humanists, who have some kind of spiritual beliefs or practices. And universally, there is great regard for the Muslim religion and the experience of Muslims around the world, their political experience, their political wisdom for having been up close and personal in empire, knowing the abuses of empire overseas, and then knowing the abuses of empire here in this country, abusing the civil liberties with the Islamophobia. Um, and the targeting, the surveillance, et cetera, where Muslims are, the canary in the mine shaft, but all of us, and especially political opponents of empire, we are on the receiving end of this as well. And there's enormous common ground among us. In our campaign, I am running, as you know, with a black African American Muslim man, and together with a white Jewish woman, we have the bases covered, I must say, on many issues, including a lot of questions about religion and respect for religious diversity and so on. So this is I think it's a very empowering um, combination and conversation. And we will all be changed by this. There's no doubt about that. There will be influence. The Green Party is not we are not a top-down organization. We are a bottom-up organization. And, our four pillars are, grassroots democracy, social justice, nonviolence, and ecological wisdom. And I think that fits pretty well with Muslim values as I've been introduced to them. So I think there is within the key values of the Green Party, there's a lot of room for growth and understanding and dialogue. So I am extremely encouraged by the kinds of coalition building that I'm witnessing. And it is such I have to say it's so exciting. The Green Party was founded, generations ago, you know, maybe one generation ago. But there's been a real need for an infusion of young people with a contemporary vision, and I think opposing genocide and empire and standing up for a climate and social justice and fairness to workers. We need the energy of the younger generation to lead the way. That's always been true, throughout history in social movements. It's always been young people who have been at the front lines pushing the envelope. And that's certainly what's going on right now in opposing the genocide. And watching Greens grow with this now has been really kind of a wonder to behold, to see our communities coming together across lines of religion and history and ethnicity and race. It's really exciting. And I must say there are a lot of African Americans now, who are and indigenous Americans as well, who are very identified with the struggle against genocide in Palestine. And that community as well has been really reinvigorated right now politically. And it is the objective of empire to keep us divided and conquered. And I think it is such a strategic move, so timely and essential for us to be coming together for our higher vision and the necessity of building political power at this very critical moment in history.
Can I ask you a question about the 5% mark? So I've heard from a number of people that if the Green Party receive 5% of the popular vote, then they have access to all sorts of funding and they get greater recognition within the system. Can you spell out what that recognition is and why that 5% is so important for you?
Yes. So if you are a newcomer to the political process, like say Dr. West, when he decided to go independent, you have to collect about 1 million signatures. And at today's rates, unless you have a well-organized base that's across the country, and even if you do have volunteers around the country, you need people to manage them. So the cost per signature nowadays is about $10. So if you're going to get 1 million signatures at the cost of $10, that's $10 million out the door right there. And then you usually have staff to add on to that as well. So it's just, it's daunting what you have to do if you're starting over. If you're in the race, and you already have ballot status, and you're already on the ballot, then you're ahead of the game. To collect 1 million signatures, it'll take you at least 9 or 10 months, unless you're RFK and you have big money donors from APAC, from billionaire, running mates and so on. Then you have corporate money and maybe super PACs, and you can buy your way into the race. Greens don't do that. We do not use any of the loopholes for legalized corruption. You can't sit down and write $1 million check to a Green. You can do that to basically all the other candidates. I don't believe Dr. West or Claudia and Karina from PSL. But, Biden, or rather Harris, Trump, RFK, and the Libertarian, you can write $1 million check through their special arrangements. And that comes with strings attached. They may not be explicit, but they're implicit. And if you are a recipient of $1 million, you know what the interests of your donor are. The Greens don't engage in that. We follow the plain old-fashioned rules. The limits for ordinary mortals of $3,300 per election. That's a lot of money for most people, but it's not much compared to $1 million. And through super PACs, you can contribute more than that. There are no limits whatsoever through super PACs, and we totally disavow super PACs entirely. So we don't play with that stuff. We are basically what everyday people, want, who funds you, runs you, and we reject all that, legalized corruption. So we are about what the everyday people, are really clamoring for. So that's why we have an agenda, which is of, by, and for the people, period. That's why our values are, really lead the way. Our values are popular values. They are people's values. We adopted our position on Israeli apartheid, occupation, and ethnic cleansing back in the year 2006. We took a position in favor of boycott, divestment, and sanctions at that time. We are not new to this. We are not fair weather friends here. We are not opportunists. This is who we are. And what we say is what we do, because all we have are the people. We don't have big money donors. So there's no one else for us to abandon, say, Muslims on behalf of. We're not going to abandon this cause to stop genocide, to challenge APAC. We are not going to abandon our opposition to Wall Street and the war machine. This is who we are. And, we very much look forward to the continuing dialogue with Muslim Americans and to moving forward together and seizing this moment where we actually do have a majority. If you look at where the power is, we have the majority who wants healthcare as a human right, who want affordable housing, who want a Green New Deal and jobs that will transition our economy to the sustainable and equitable economy and future that we deserve. So what we say is what we do. We very much see eye to eye with Muslim Americans on so many things, and we very much look forward to continuing to grow the political movement together.
Can I ask you a question about American power in the world? Now, you've made it very clear that American empire, American power is usually a cause for bad in the world. It doesn't create a world which is the type of world that you envisage. Uh, then tell me, where do you see the position of America in the world? Would the world be better without the exercise of American power? Like, paint me a picture of the America you design, the America you want.
Yes. So let me say very simply about foreign policy. We need to move from a monopolar world or a unipolar world dominated by one imperial force to a multipolar world. I think that's not rocket science. There are other economic forces and military forces in the world right now. We need to work collaboratively. We need to be adults in the room together, working according to international law, human rights, and diplomacy. The U.S mode of operating right now is through economic and military domination, a policy that was formally named full spectrum dominance. We dominate every sphere of potential competition or conflict, and we prevent even regional powers from rising to regional dominance. That has been the guidelines of American foreign policy since the fall of the Soviet Union, and this is not workable, especially because we are no longer the dominant power. We're not the dominant economic power. We see BRICS, which is in the process of enlarging right now. And, having started with 5, it's now like 12 members, I think, and then many partners as well. So there are rising um, economic powers and collaborations that we have not been friendly to whatsoever. So we need to uh, cease and desist from attempting to dominate and become a player in a multipolar world operating according to international law. We've been substituting for international law with what we call a rules-based order. Whose rules? Our rules, rules that change from situation to situation. We need to subscribe to the body of international law. Yes, there are some things that do need improvement, like the Security Council for the United Nations needs to be democratized. There are improvements that need to be made that can be made. So we can move to a foreign policy that's going to work for all of us. And the America that I see stops squandering half of its congressional budget on the endless war machine and puts those dollars back into the needs of the American people, and which also takes the role of humanizer and of supporting human rights and the helping nations meet, especially the poor nations of the global South, meet the urgent needs of the climate crisis, which we have been really the major contributor to. Historically, we have contributed the greatest burden of greenhouse gases. So we need to be a responsible player here that assists the less fortunate in the global community, because we are still the wealthiest nation around the world throughout the course of world history. We have enormous wealth and resources, and we need to use them for the betterment of the American people and to support the world in which we live, because these two are interacting. If you look at the migration crisis that this country is experiencing, our approach is that the most important thing we can do to stop the migration crisis is to cease causing it in the first place through very misguided and harmful U.S. policies, from endless war, regime change operations, economic neocolonialism. Like in Haiti, we overthrew the democratically elected president of Haiti twice, Aristide. We overthrew him twice. And after he was overthrown, the Secretary of State, Hillary Clinton, came in and reversed the minimum wage law, which had raised minimum wages in Haiti from a mere 30 cents an hour to a mere 60 cents an hour. Our government, our Secretary of State, pushed that back in order to do a favor and let the clothing manufacturers reap maximum profits by exploiting labor. This unfortunately is the rule, not the exception. We overthrew the democratically elected government of Iran, way back in the 1950s, because Iran was going to nationalize its oil and use its national resources for the benefit of its people rather than for British Petroleum and the United States, who came in and overthrew him and substituted, this absolutely murderous dictator, the Shah of Iran, and we kept him in power, for decades.
Mm.
Same thing in Guatemala. We overthrew their government on behalf of United Fruit so that the peasants would not be the recipients of redistributed land to enable them to support themselves. So the U.S. has played this role throughout history, and that is not the kind of world we want. That does not win us friends and influence people. Again, we need to move from a monopolar world that is dominating dominating economies and military, such that we are driving migration crises. So we're looking at migrants from Haiti, we're looking at migrants from Guatemala, from South America in particular. Also, the drug wars. America's war on drugs also empowers the drug cartels, and it's the violence of those cartels then that are driving, many people to come to this country fleeing the violence.
You paint a picture of America which I think will sound like music to most of our ears outside of America. But how much is your your vision of America shared by American people? Because from the outside, we tend to get a very skewed understanding of the American electorate, the American population, and their proclivity, I suppose, to American militancy, if that's the right way to phrase it. How much is what you say shared by ordinary Americans?
For that, I think the most telling statistic really is to look at Americans' opposition to the genocide
Mm.
and American support for actually a weapons embargo right now. So what you hear from the political parties, what you hear from the political class, the political elites, is not the American people. The American people want to end the genocide. They want a weapons embargo on Israel to enforce that end. They want to cut the military budget. Poll after poll shows that Americans do not support catastrophic war after catastrophic war. That's why we have this corporatized media, which is, Noam Chomsky called it manufacturing consent. Consent is manufactured through propaganda. This is why our campaign is shoved out of the way, because we are a very inconvenient truth and a very inconvenient, blockade to manufacturing consent. Truth is a very powerful thing. It's hard for people to mobilize to do the right thing unless there's someone out there, and that's not necessarily a candidate. It's the students who are out there on the campuses, and that's why their heads are being bashed in. And this is not happening. The bashing of those heads is not happening incidentally. That's not happening because the American people want it. That's because the American power class is sold out. They are sold out to the military-industrial complex. They are sold out to AIPAC. So the messages that are being broadcast in this country and from this country around the world do not reflect where the American people are. You really have to dig to find that. You really have to be looking at independent media systematically. You have to be really searching the polls, and they often don't ask these questions because they don't want the responses to be in the public domain. But over and over again, when the American people are given a choice, they don't want to be at war. And the genocidal war going on in Gaza right now is an example. If you polled the American people about expanding this war and potentially globalizing it and potentially allowing it to go nuclear on behalf of protecting Israel's right to commit genocide, the American people would be absolutely up in arms about this, especially if they were reminded or even informed that the draft is here and they are in the target hairs of that draft. And if this war explodes, we are not only then paying in dollars, we're paying in blood for this genocide. And that could happen. And the American people are opposed to this. So, the American people want healthcare as a human right. They want a solution. They want rent control. They want, they want affordable housing to be built again. It was under Bill Clinton that public housing was brought to an end. Under Democrat Bill Clinton, the program of public housing was stopped with a thing called the Faircloth Amendment that prevents public dollars from being spent on public housing. And Europe is building quality, mixed income, affordable housing. The U.S. doesn't do that. We subsidize luxury housing and then take a little tiny fraction of it to be affordable. The American people are hungry for what our campaign is offering, and also likewise for a solution to the climate crisis. Overwhelmingly, the American people want that right now. So we offer solution after solution, and that includes backing off of this imperial foreign policy that shoots first and asks questions later. The American people don't want this. They want to bring our dollars back to take care of our urgent problems here. This is why our voices are kept out of this dialogue, because when people hear this, I mean, take a look at the comments on The Breakfast Club. So, The Breakfast Club, which is a very popular podcast, a video podcast, especially viewed by African Americans. So Butch Ware, my running mate, and myself were interviewed. We were really set up for an ambush by a talking head with the usual, ridiculous propaganda, which we shot down very quickly. And if you read the comments, there are over 20,000 comments right now. If you look at the full posting, it's just mind-boggling to see. Comment after comment is, I was not going to vote in this election. Now I am registering green and I am voting for Stein Ware. People have been so hungering for this. This is why the Democrats are coming out with their advertising campaign, because they are very terrified that the cat should get out of the bag, that the American people have other options. Coming into this race, over 60% of Americans in the Gallup poll prior to this race, over 60% were saying they want another choice in this election because the two that we have are doing such a horrible job of serving the public interest. So we see this over and over again. The American people are hungering for what we don't have. It's very important not to be swayed by the propaganda that's out there, this propaganda of powerlessness. In fact, we the people are not powerless, we are powerful. And as Alice Walker said, the biggest way people give up power is by not knowing we have it to start with. We have it, it's time to use it, because we ourselves, we're all in the target here. James Baldwin said that, all children everywhere belong to all of us, and the children in Gaza are the, fundamental illustration of that. They belong to all of us. It's time for us to change business as usual here. It's time for us to change American politics so that we can step up and actually serve the children of the world, which are our children as well. And our children are not okay unless all children are okay. The world is just too interdependent a place right now, and people flow between countries, and we share an atmosphere and water and oceans and food and an economy. We are too connected now to be at eternal war with each other, or to have leadership who cannot see how we are interconnected and interdependent, and who can step up to the plate and leave behind them their war criminal instincts and background and training. We need to really throw those bums out. They need to be in The Hague, not in the White House. We need to be stepping up to embrace and demand an America and a world that works for all of us. If it doesn't work for all of us, fundamentally, it's not going to work for any of us.
And you would like to see Joe Biden in The Hague?
I would like to see him face justice.
Yeah, good.
I think all war criminals, all the major enablers of this genocide should face justice. I've just heard an informal report that Israel just hit Iran. So, this could be unfolding as we speak. I don't know. There have been a lot of indicators that this is going to happen, and it could. And no one knows where this is going to go.
Yeah.
I think it's not too soon for us to stand up and demand that voices of reason and justice be heard, and that we stand up for the politics we deserve. God knows where this could go in the blink of an eye. We've been on an escalation ladder for decades, really. But, certainly for the last year, Bibi Netanyahu has been attempting to drag us into, a devastating war, potentially a nuclear war.
Yeah.
And we need to stand up and be heard, and to fight for a world we can survive in, and that our children can survive in.
Dr. Jill Stein, it's really been a pleasure speaking to you. And I hope you can make a dent in this two-party nightmare. Thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you. And it's JillStein2024.com for those who'd like to know more. It's not too late. the future's in our hands. Thank you so much.
You've got a punishing schedule. I was speaking to Sam, and it's you're traveling from city to city at the moment.
Oh yeah, and then we're either doing events or we're doing interviews, and I don't have a half hour to like do a laundry or do anything. I'm eating on the run constantly.
Yeah.
Um, it, it would be hard to maintain this for very much longer. So but on the other hand, it would be impossible not to just give this my all right now. It feels like this is our chance to stand up and fight this horrific genocide. And the response that's happening right now feels nothing short of miraculous. I've never been in a situation before where people, total strangers, are coming up to me, bursting out in tears and greeting me with hugs, like I'm a member of their immediate family. The passion that's going into this campaign right now against enormous demonization, the effort to criminalize us, right and left. The Democrats are pulling out every dirty trick in the book, you know, to try to silence me, to intimidate me, to get me to drop out, and to intimidate voters, to stop them from voting for justice and for a future we deserve. There's so much fear campaigning going on, especially about Donald Trump. He's terrible, but so is Kamala Harris. Absolutely terrible, and so I couldn't hold myself back. I was recruited to run this race when I had other plans. My family had other plans. So I want to make the most of every minute here. It feels to me, as I've been saying now in some of our gatherings, as Martin Luther King said, the moral arc of the universe is long, but it bends towards justice. It feels right now like we are in one of those moments where the universe is bending. It's bending because it has to. It's bending because we have a genocide on our hands. But as a consequence of that genocide, the moral universe is changing. And, and there is a new moral compass here. And much of that is coming from the Muslim community and the Arab American community. And we are forever changed. I think in a way that gives us a real fighting chance for peace and justice and a world that's going to work for all of us. But it feels to me almost like physically that the universe is bending right now, and we can feel it bending inside of us in a way that is quite transformational.
Really, I think we're eternally grateful to you for what you've done and for your stance on Gaza. And I think I'm not a voter, and I'm an outsider, of course, but people are talking about you here. It's a conversation here, the Green Party. So the Muslim community, of course, speaks to their relatives abroad, and it's very clear to me that the message is getting through.
I do think so. And I don't remember if I said it in this interview or the prior ones, but, I grew up after the Holocaust, and the genocide of Jews, when our community was asking, is there life after genocide? I wasn't, because I was young. I didn't feel the genocide, but people around me were pretty horrified about it. Um, and I was taught, that when you see something wrong, you have to stand up and fight it, and uh, that we have to hold everyone accountable, not just the perpetrators of genocide, but the bystanders to genocide. You cannot be a bystander to genocide or anything else. So that's why I became a social activist, and I grew up dedicated to the proposition that genocide will not happen again, certainly not on my watch. And I never expected to actually see our country committing that genocide and that blood on our hands. And it made it impossible for me not to step up when it became clear that having an anti-genocide candidate in the race and an anti-genocide voice was going to depend on the Green Party using his ballot lines. So I had helped recruit a candidate, a wonderful candidate, Dr. West, to be that, to be our representative and use our ballot lines. But when he decided he would rather run independent, I knew there's no way, first time out of the starting gate, that you're going to get on the ballot unless you're selling your soul and you've got billionaire donors. A principled anti-war, anti-genocide candidate is not going to be buying their way onto the ballot. So it was going to depend on the Green Party if we were going to have a strong voice to truly challenge empire and to fight the genocide in this election. So I felt like I had no choice. I had to stand up because I made this commitment, above all to my mother, who was most disturbed about this in my family. I made that commitment that I would stand up when I saw wrong happening in the world. That would be my job, and that's why I became a medical doctor. I was going to serve and help, help right the wrongs. And now the greatest wrong imaginable fell into the lap of our party, which was really going to be the only way we could bring this front and center into the election. So that's why I could not say no, although there were a lot of people telling me I should say no, I should not stand up. I could not conscience doing that. And, this is just, once you see this, you can't not see it.
Yeah.
So we got to fix it.
Thank you. Thank you so much. We're just so appreciative of your efforts and what you've done. So thank you so much for your time today.
Pleasure. Wonderful
Good.
talking with you.
Please remember to subscribe to our social media and YouTube channels and head over to our website thinkingmuslim.com to sign up to my weekly newsletter. Jazakallah khair.